My name is Marjorie Allen, and at 68 years old, I thought I had already lived through every kind of storm a life could bring. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for the moment I walked into my own kitchen and found my daughter-in-law, Lydia, tearing through my cabinets like she owned the place. I stood frozen in the doorway, my hand still resting on the frame, watching her drop my cast-iron skillet into a cardboard box so carelessly the clang echoed through the room. She didn't even flinch. She didn't even look at me. It felt as if my presence, the woman who had lived in this house for more than 4 decades, didn't exist. When she finally noticed me, she straightened up slowly, one hand gripping the edge of the box. Her eyes swept over me with that familiar mix of disdain and victory, the look she always wore when she believed she'd gained ground I couldn't reclaim. Then she said the words that felt like they cracked something inside my chest. "What I want, I'll take. I give the orders here." Her voice cut through the air, sharp as broken glass. I could smell the lemon cleaner still lingering on the counters. I'd wiped them down that morning, unaware that the first person to touch them afterward would be someone who walked into my home with more entitlement than respect. Behind her, sunlight streamed through the window, landing over the boxes already filled, my dishes, my cookware, pieces of my past she hadn't earned. I didn't shout. I didn't argue. I simply held her stare, my pulse thudding in my ears as a cold realization settled deep inside me. This wasn't the beginning of a misunderstanding. It was the beginning of a war I had never wanted, but would no longer avoid. Lydia didn't stop to acknowledge the way my voice trembled when I finally asked her what she thought she was doing. She only shifted the box on her hip, letting one of my ceramic bowls drop inside with a hollow thud that made my stomach twist. I stepped farther into the kitchen, the floor warm under my slippers from the afternoon sun, though every part of me felt cold. For a moment, I wondered whether this was all really happening or if my age had finally brought me hallucinations my doctor warned could come with stress. But no, there she was, her hair tied in that tight blonde knot that always made her look like she'd been carved from something hard and unforgiving. And she was moving through my kitchen as if her name were on the deed. Thomas appeared in the doorway behind her. He gave me a quick glance, the kind of glance a child offers a parent after knocking over something precious. But there was no apology behind it, just exhaustion or surrender, maybe both. He didn't speak. He bent down, lifted the box Lydia had filled, and carried it out to their car. The screen door slapped shut behind him, and I felt the sting of that sound like a slap to my own face. Lydia kept rummaging. She unfolded another box, the cardboard scraping open like dry skin. "Don't look at me like that," she said, her back still turned to me. "You don't need any of this. You barely cook anymore. You shouldn't be living in a house this big by yourself. It's irresponsible." I tried to steady my breath, but it snagged in my chest. "You're taking things that belong to me." She spun around then, the tape dispenser in her hand like a weapon she was prepared to use. "Thomas is your son, which means everything here is practically his, and I'm the one who keeps this family moving. So yes, I'm taking what we need." Her eyes locked on mine, and for the first time since she stepped into the house, she seemed eager to see the way I reacted. She wanted my fear, my anger, my defeat. I gave her none of those things. I simply stood there, my back straightening without me consciously choosing to do so. The steadiness in me seemed to irritate her more than any outburst could have. When Thomas came back for the next box, Emily's name slipped from Lydia's mouth so casually it nearly knocked the air out of me. "And if you think about making this difficult," she said, brushing past me to grab one of my mixing bowls, "I can make sure Emily doesn't come around here anymore. She listens to me more than that girl listens to anyone. It wasn't just a threat. It was a blade, sharpened and waiting, and she knew exactly where my softest places were. The thought of losing my granddaughter, my sweet Emily, who spent summers on my porch and winters helping me decorate the tree, sent a deep ache down my spine. Thomas froze mid-step when he heard Lydia's words, but he didn't speak. He carried the box out again, shoulders sagging, and left me alone with her poisonous certainty. When they finally left, the kitchen looked like a skeleton of the room I'd known for years. Bare hooks, empty shelves. The silence afterward felt heavier than the clatter of her theft. I didn't cry. I didn't shout or beg or collapse into a chair the way a woman my age might be allowed to. I walked to the sink, ran a glass of water, and drank until my throat no longer felt like it was closing. Then I washed the glass, dried it, and placed it on the counter as if keeping that one small thing in order could anchor me. Evening settled over the house like a thin gray blanket. I was in the living room when the knock came. 3 light taps, the way Emily always did, so I'd know it was her and not her mother. I opened the door, and she threw her arms around me before I could even greet her. "Grandma, I'm sorry," she whispered. Her voice broke on the last word. She smelled faintly of peppermint gum, the same kind she'd chewed since she was 10. Dad told me what happened, but he left out most of it. I heard Mom on the phone. She said she's going to come back. She said you won't stop her. I closed the door behind us and held her shoulders. "Emily, you shouldn't be here if she told you not to come. I don't care what she says," she replied, wiping her cheek with the sleeve of her hoodie. "I saw her take your things last week. I took pictures. I didn't know what to do then, but I brought them." She handed me her phone. The screen lit up with images of Lydia loading my belongings into the trunk of their car. Pot lids, serving trays, my good china. Each tap of my finger revealed another piece of evidence I hadn't even known I needed. Something steadied inside me. Not anger, not vengeance. Something quieter and heavier, like resolve settling into my bones. I walked to my bedroom, Emily following silently. I pulled out the folder I hadn't opened in years, the one my husband left me before he passed. Emily watched me lay the documents on the bedspread, deed papers, notarized signatures, his careful handwriting. She looked up at me. "Grandma, are you going to do something?" For the first time that day, I felt breath fill my lungs with ease. I closed the folder gently. "Yeah, sweetheart, I am." And as Emily's eyes widened with relief, I realized that the war Lydia had tried to start in my kitchen earlier wasn't going to end with me surrendering. It would end with me standing. And tomorrow, it would truly begin. The next morning arrived with a pale, washed-out light that crept across my bedroom floor long before I had the strength to get out of bed. I hadn't slept much. Every time I closed my eyes, Lydia's voice replayed in my mind, slicing through the quiet. But beneath the lingering ache of her words, there was a low, steady pulse of determination that hadn't been there before. It felt unfamiliar, like using muscles I hadn't stretched in years. But it was mine, and it was growing stronger with every breath. I made coffee the way I always did, letting the smell settle into the kitchen like a soft reassurance that this was still my home. Emily had left before sunrise, slipping out with a whispered promise that she would check on me after school. I didn't try to stop her. I knew she needed space from whatever chaos Lydia was creating at her house, and I needed space to think clearly. I had just poured my coffee when Carol appeared at the back door. She didn't knock. She never had. She tapped the glass lightly with her knuckles and let herself in, carrying a grocery bag filled with muffins and fruit. Carol believed food could solve half the world's suffering, and I didn't have the heart to tell her it never truly solved anything. It only softened the edges long enough for a person to catch their breath. "Marjorie," she said, setting the bag down and taking one look at me. "You look like someone ran you through a meat grinder." I tried to smile. It came out crooked. "Rough day yesterday." Her eyes narrowed. I heard raised voices, not enough to make out words, but enough to know something foul was brewing. "Tell me." So I did. All of it. Lydia tearing through my kitchen. The threats. Thomas's silence. Emily's pictures. The box after box of my belongings being dragged out like junk someone no longer wanted. By the time I finished, the kitchen felt smaller, as if the memory of Lydia's intrusion was still lingering in the corners. Carol took a slow breath. "You can't let this continue, Marjorie. She's not just overstepping, she's trampling you." "I know." I placed my palm on the folder lying on the counter. "That's why I'm calling someone today. A lawyer." Carol blinked, her expression shifting from outrage to approval. Good. I didn't tell her how long it had taken for me to even consider the possibility of fighting back. Thomas's marriage had always felt like a fragile thing to me, and I spent years holding my tongue just to keep the peace. But peace was impossible now. Lydia had made sure of that. After Carol left, I sat at the kitchen table with the folder open in front of me. The papers smelled faintly of ink and old wood, reminders of the day my husband and I had sat with a notary in an office downtown and signed the documents that placed this house solely in my name. He'd been so sure of what he wanted. He squeezed my hand as he told me it was to protect me from exactly this sort of thing, a future he prayed wouldn't come, but prepared for anyway. His handwriting stared back at me, calm, steady, unshakable. I ran my fingertips over his signature before picking up the phone and dialing the number Emily had found for me. It belonged to a lawyer named Declan Pierce. His voice was firm, polite, and free of the hurried impatience I feared I'd find. I explained my situation with as much grace as I could manage, though my voice shook once when I mentioned Lydia's threat about Emily. Mr. Pierce didn't interrupt. When I finished, he said, "Mrs. Allen, you did the right thing by calling. I'd like to see the documents you mentioned, and I'd also like to bring someone from the county's property division with me to verify certain details. Are you available tomorrow morning?" "Yes," I said, my thumb trembling slightly against the receiver. "I'll be here." After the call, I sat for a long time without moving. A thin breeze slipped through the cracked kitchen window, rustling the papers on the table. Outside, a delivery truck rumbled past, and the world carried on as if nothing monumental had shifted inside my chest. But something had. The ache of yesterday had cooled into a clean, steady burn that pushed me forward. Around noon, I stepped out onto the porch to water my plants. The marigolds drooped a little, their bright petals tired under the summer heat. As I leaned down to check the soil, a car slowed in front of my house. For one tense heartbeat, I thought it might be Lydia returning to reclaim whatever she believed she was owed. But the car didn't stop. It rolled past, disappearing around the corner, leaving only a whisper of exhaust behind. I exhaled, steadying myself. The truth was clear now. Peace wouldn't return until I fought for it. When Emily arrived that afternoon, she found me at the dining table with the folder spread open. The lines on her forehead eased when I told her I had spoken to a lawyer. She sat beside me, leaning her head against my shoulder in quiet relief. "I'm proud of you," she murmured. I didn't realize how much I needed to hear those words until they settled inside me like a warm ember. And as the sun dipped low over the neighborhood, casting long shadows across my living room floor, I understood that tomorrow would be a turning point. Lydia had crossed into my home with force and certainty. But the next time someone stepped over my threshold, it would be someone standing with me, someone who knew the law, someone who could stop her. For the first time in days, I felt the ground beneath my feet steady. Tomorrow, the real battle would begin. Morning came earlier than I expected. I woke before the sun had fully risen, the house wrapped in that soft, bluish light that always made everything look gentler than it really was. I moved through the kitchen slowly, setting out 2 mugs for the guests who would arrive soon. My hands didn't shake the way they had yesterday. Whatever fear had lingered overnight had settled into a calm readiness. I wasn't excited, but I wasn't afraid either. I felt aligned, as if some invisible part of me had finally stood up straight after being bent for far too long. At exactly 9:30, a car pulled up in front of the house. Through the window, I could see a tall man with a leather briefcase step out, followed by another in a county-issued jacket. Declan Pierce had the look of someone who measured his words carefully, the type of man who didn't lose his composure even when the world around him cracked open. Officer Hunt, on the other hand, stood with the easy firmness of someone who was used to walking onto properties and establishing order. I opened the door before they could knock. "Mrs. Allen," Mr. Pierce said with a polite nod. "Thank you for having us. This is Officer Bradley Hunt. He's helping verify the property details." I stepped aside to let them in. "Thank you both for coming." They followed me to the living room, and I laid the folder of documents on the coffee table. Mr. Pierce put on a pair of thin reading glasses and began examining the papers, his brow tightening just slightly as he moved from page to page. Officer Hunt took note of the signatures and stamps, occasionally jotting something onto his clipboard. We were halfway through the review when I heard it, the sound of car doors slamming outside, one after another. My pulse quickened, even without looking. I knew who it was. Lydia's voice carried through the open porch windows before she even reached the door. "Thomas, carry the boxes inside. I want the rest of the living room cleared today." I closed my eyes once, steadying myself, then walked toward the entryway with Mr. Pierce and Officer Hunt behind me. The doorknob felt warm under my hand as I turned it and stepped onto the porch. Lydia froze when she saw us. Her confident stride faltered for half a second before she forced it back into place, lifting her chin. Thomas stood behind her holding 2 flattened boxes, his breath fogging slightly in the morning air despite the summer warmth. "What are you doing here?" Lydia snapped, as if I were the one interrupting her day. Then her gaze shifted to the men behind me. "And who exactly are they?" Mr. Pierce stepped forward calmly. "Good morning. I'm Declan Pierce, Mrs. Allen's attorney. This is Officer Hunt with the County Property Division." The superiority in Lydia's expression flickered. Why would she need a lawyer? This is a family matter. "Actually," Mr. Pierce replied, "it concerns property rights, potential trespassing, and the removal of items without consent. Those are not family matters. They're legal ones." Lydia's mouth tightened. She laughed, though the sound lacked conviction. "You're joking. This house belongs to my husband's family. He has every right to be here." Officer Hunt spoke next, flipping to a page on his clipboard. "According to county records updated 17 years ago, this property is solely owned by Mrs. Marjorie Allen. There is no joint ownership, no shared claim, and no inheritance transfer currently in effect." Thomas's head lifted slightly, his eyes darting toward me, uncertainty clouding his face. Lydia recovered faster. She stepped closer, her heels clicking sharply against the wooden porch. "Thomas is her son. That's enough of a connection, and I am his wife. That gives me standing." "No, ma'am," Officer Hunt said, his tone firm but professional. "Marriage doesn't grant you the right to remove property you do not own, especially after being told to leave." Her jaw twitched. "I wasn't told to leave." "You were, Lydia." Thomas finally muttered, his voice barely more than a breath. The first crack in her armor showed... Mr. Pierce opened the folder and held out a photograph, one Emily had taken from the upstairs window. Lydia, unmistakable in her fitted white blouse, carrying out a box filled with my belongings. More images waited behind that one. Lydia's face drained of color. These are taken out of context. Here's the full context. Mr. Pierce clicked a button on a small recorder he'd placed in his pocket minutes earlier. Lydia's voice poured from the device, unmistakable in tone and cruelty. If you say anything, I'll make sure Emily doesn't see you again. The words hung in the air like heavy smoke. Thomas's face crumpled. He reached for the railing as if the weight of her threat was too much to stand under. I had kept my eyes on Lydia, watching fear finally seep into her expression. Her bravado was crumbling, each second peeling back another layer she had relied on for years. For the first time since she stepped foot into my home, she looked unsure. Mr. Pierce closed the recorder. Mrs. Allen will not be pressing charges today, but she will be setting boundaries. Lydia swallowed hard. What boundaries? I stepped forward, surprised by the steadiness in my own voice. You will return everything you've taken. You will not enter my home without permission. You will not use Emily against me. And you will sign a written agreement stating you have no claim to this house now or in the future. She stared at me, then at Thomas, who could no longer meet her eye. Her shoulders sagged, the fight draining from her all at once. I won't sign anything, she whispered. Mr. Pierce folded his arms. Then we proceed with charges. The fear in her eyes deepened. After a long moment, she reached for the pen, and as she signed her name with a trembling hand, something in me finally lifted, something heavy, long carried, and overdue to be set down. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but today, at least, I had reclaimed my ground. The courthouse felt colder than I expected, its high ceilings and pale walls swallowing every sound that wasn't already trembling inside my chest. Thomas sat beside me, his hands clasped tightly, his knee bouncing with a nervous rhythm he couldn't stop. Across the aisle, Lydia stood stiff in a dark suit, her expression stretched into something brittle and overconfident. She wouldn't look at me. She never could when the truth was close enough to touch. Judge Merriman entered, and the room shifted into silence. When Lydia's attorney rose to speak, he painted a picture of a woman, me, who had manipulated her dying husband into signing the deed. It was a story crafted from desperation, not evidence. Still, hearing it stung like salt against an old wound. Mr. Pierce stood next. His voice carried calm authority as he placed the notarized records before the judge, then called the county doctor who had treated my husband. The doctor's testimony was steady. My husband had been fully lucid the day he signed. Then came the notary, who confirmed the same and added details Lydia couldn't twist. Finally, Mr. Pierce clicked on a small recorder. Lydia's voice filled the courtroom, sharp and unmistakable. If she says anything, I'll make sure Emily never sees her again. The judge lifted his gaze slowly toward Lydia. She froze, the last of her arrogance draining away until she looked small, almost unrecognizable. Thomas lowered his head into his hands, shame shaking through him. I didn't reach for him, but something inside us both finally broke free. When the judge spoke, the words felt like warm light cutting through months of cold. This lawsuit is dismissed. The property transfer stands. Mrs. Lydia Allen will pay all legal fees incurred. A soft exhale slipped from me. Not triumph, just release. Outside the courthouse, Thomas touched my arm. Mom, I'm so sorry. I nodded. Then start again. Start better. And as we stepped into the afternoon sun, I realized I hadn't just kept my home. I had reclaimed myself.